Ecclesiastes, Gesundheit. It's an interesting book of the Bible, and one that I was not horribly familiar with before. I wound up preaching on it last week. It was one of the track 2 readings. Anybody use it in your church last week? No. Yeah, so I preached on it, and if there's one quote from Ecclesiastes, it's probably this one. Vanity of vanities, says the teacher, vanity of vanities, all is vanity. What are y'all familiar with Ecclesiastes at all? Have you studied it, read it, preached on it? No, I see some head shakings. It's kind of a weird. I'm sure you have, Paul. It's kind of a weird book. And you can tell even from the lectionary that we don't necessarily know what to do with this book, because first of all, it's a track 2 reading last week, right? It's not track 1, but even the reading itself is not continuous. It like last week's reading was what this verse, chapter 1, verse 2, and then it skips to verses 12 to 14, and then it goes to chapter 2, verses 16 to 23. It's an odd book, and we'll look at some reasons why it is. So what's an Ecclesiastes anyway, right? So it is from the Hebrew word koleth, depending on how you want to pronounce it, meaning teacher. Martin Luther, for some reason, we've been bashing Martin Luther a lot today. Martin Luther instead used the word preacher, which this word does not mean at all. It means teacher. In ancient Greek, you see the word there, it's Ecclesiastes, but then just literally transliterated, into the Latin alphabet as Ecclesiastes, but shares the same root word with ecclesiastic. We know what that means, right? It can be a priest or a cleric. It can relate to the church, but it comes from this word meaning teacher in Hebrew. And the book is named out of that, the very first verse of the book, which says the words of the teacher, son of David, king in Jerusalem. So when and where was it written? Well, the thing is, nobody really knows. There are no events or dates or places really named in the text, but from pure language analysis, they say that it has to be written post-exile. 539, and because they found fragments of it in the Dead Sea Scrolls, they can date it as being written no later than the 3rd century before Christian era. And there are no direct relations to events in the book, but they do say that conditions in the 5th century BCE kind of match the context of the book's content, a time of upheaval and change. But that's basically it. They can't place it more accurately than that. The author is anonymous, but it's traditionally been considered that the teacher is Solomon, and that sometimes that Solomon himself wrote it in the tradition. In the Hebrew Bible, it's placed within the 5 Megillot scrolls: Song of Songs, Book of Ruth, Book of Lamentations, this one, and then the Book of Esther. But it wasn't added canonically to the Hebrew Bible until the 1st century before Christian era, because of some of the peculiarities we'll talk about. I think that it is usually read yearly during the Feast of Sukkot, the Feast of Tabernacles. And in the Christian Bible, it's placed within it's considered one of the wisdom books, along with Proverbs and Job, mainly again, because I think people don't really know what to do with it. So I wanted to give you a quick overview of the book, just using, if you know the Bible Project, they do these wonderful little short videos that kind of give you a look at the structure and look at the content in a quick thing. So we're going to watch this video, and then we'll go on and talk a little bit more. But this is relatively short. It's about 7 minutes, I think. and that it uses up a lot of my time. But it's more fun than listening to me.
The book of Ecclesiastes. It's part of the Bible's wisdom literature, and it opens with this line: the words of Kohelet, the son of David, king in Jerusalem. Now, in Hebrew, the word Kohelet means someone who has gathered people together. And in this case, it's to learn, so it's often translated in English as teacher. And the teacher is said to be a son or a descendant of King David. And so there are different views about who this figure might have been. Many think that it refers to King Solomon, others to maybe one of the later kings of David's line, and still others think that it's actually a later Israelite teacher who has adopted a Solomon-like persona as a teaching aid. Whichever of these views is correct, the key thing is to recognize that the teacher is a character in the book and is different than the author of the book, who remains anonymous. So we do hear the teacher's voice for most of the book, but it's actually a different voice, the author, who introduces us to the teacher in the first sentence and then at the end concludes the book by summarizing and evaluating everything the teacher just said. So the author is someone who wants us to hear all that the teacher has to say and then help us process it and form our own conclusion. So what does the teacher have to say? Well, the author summarizes the teacher's basic message at the beginning and right at the end, and it's Hevel, Hevel. Everything is utterly Hevel. Now, most English Bibles translate this word Hevel as meaningless, but that doesn't quite capture the heart of the idea. In Hebrew, Hevel literally means vapor or smoke, and the teacher uses this word 38 times in the book as a metaphor to describe how life is, first of all, temporary or fleeting, like a wisp of smoke. But secondly, also how life is an enigma or a paradox. Like smoke, it appears solid, but when you try and grab onto it...
And I'm sorry, I just wanted to interrupt briefly because hevel, the Hebrew word meaning vapor, smoke, or something fleeting, is what was the NRSV translates as vanity. So that vanity of vanities, hevel. So I'm sorry, just to interrupt and put that in context.
There's nothing there. So there's so much beauty or goodness in the world, but just when you're enjoying it, tragedy strikes and it all seems to blow away. Or we all have a strong sense of justice, but all the time bad things happen to good people. So life is constantly, it's unpredictable, it's unstable, or in the teacher's words, like chasing after the wind. Hevel. Now that's kind of a downer. So why is he saying all of this? The author's basic goal is to target all of the ways that we try to build meaning and purpose in our lives apart from God. And he lets the teacher deconstruct these. So the author thinks we spend most of our time investing energy and emotion in things that ultimately have no lasting meaning or significance. And he lets the teacher give us a hard lesson in reality. You can see this most clearly in the opening and closing poems, which focus first of all on time and then on death. So the teacher says, you can spend your whole life working and achieving because you think that makes your life meaningful. You should really stop and consider the march of time. For all of the human effort that takes place in the world, nothing really ever changes. So sure, we develop technology and we build nations that rise and fall, but go climb a mountain and see if it cares. It was there long before any of us, and it will be here long after. I mean, no one's even going to remember you or anything you did 100 years from now, but that mountain, it'll still be there. And the ocean will still be breaking on the beach, and the sun will still rise and set. And so time will eventually erase you and me and everything that we care about. And if that's not disheartening enough, the teacher also can't stop talking about death all the way through the book, but especially in this poem near the end. He says death is the great equalizer, and it renders meaningless most of our daily activities. It devours the wise and the fool, the rich and the poor. No matter who you are, what you've done, good or bad, we're all going to die, and it's inescapable. So with these two ideas in hand, the teacher goes on to consider all the activities and false hopes that we invest our lives in to find meaning and significance, like wealth or career or social status or pleasure. So you think working hard is going to make life worth it? Think about the stress and the toll that that takes on you, all the anxiety and the sleepless nights. And by the time you actually earn some wealth, you're going to be too old to enjoy it anyway. And then by the time that you have to pass it on to someone, they may not even be someone who cares about anything that you did. Or maybe you think pleasure is going to make life worth it for you. Go for it. Live for your vacations, live for the weekend party. Monday always comes. Hevel, hevel. Everything is utterly hevel. So what does the teacher advocate then? That we become pure hedonists or relativists? Well, no, that would be hevel too. The teacher acknowledges the ideas from Proverbs that living by wisdom and the fear of the Lord, that these have real advantages. On the whole, life will probably go better for you. See, but the problem is that even living by wisdom and the fear of the Lord, they're hevel too, because they don't guarantee a good life. Good people die tragically, and horrible people live long and prosper. There's just too many exceptions. And so even wisdom is a hevel. Again, not meaningless, but an enigma. Wisdom doesn't work the way you think it should all of the time. So what's the way forward in the midst of all this hevel? And here, paradoxically, the teacher discovers the key to the true enjoyment of life under the sun. It's accepting hevel. It's acknowledging that everything in your life is totally out of your control. About 6 different times at some of the bleakest moments in his monologue, the teacher talks about the gift of God, which is the enjoyment of simple, good things in life, like friendship or family, a good meal, or a sunny day. You can't control these things. You're certainly not guaranteed them, but that's their beauty. When I come to adopt a posture of total trust in God, it frees me to simply enjoy my life as I actually experience it, not as I think it ought to be. Because even my expectations about what life ought to be are ultimately hevel. Hevel. Everything under the sun is utterly hevel. And so the teacher's words come to a close. Right here at the end, the author speaks up again, and he brings it all to a conclusion. He says, the teacher's words are very important for us to hear. He likens them to a shepherd's staff with a goad, a pointy end, which might hurt when it pokes you, but he says the teacher is trying to poke you to get you to move in the right direction towards greater wisdom. The author then warns us that you can actually take the teacher's words too far, and you could spend your whole life buried in books trying to answer life's existential puzzles. Don't try, he says. You'll never get there. And so instead, the author offers his own conclusion, and it's this: fear God and keep his commandments. This is the whole duty of humans, for God will bring every deed into judgment, every hidden thing, whether good or evil. And so the author thinks it's good to let the teacher challenge your false hopes and remind you that time and death make most of life completely out of your control. But what gives life true meaning is the hope of God's judgment. The hope that one day God will clear away all of the hevel and bring true justice to our world. And it's that hope that should fuel a life of honesty and integrity before God, despite the fact that I remain puzzled by most of life's mysteries. And that's the wisdom of the book of Ecclesiastes.
Does that leave you depressed, hopeful? What? You've just gotten a quick overview of Ecclesiastes, but what are your reactions to it?
So does that mean that this presentation is hevel?
On one level, yes. Everything is heaven. Everything we do, everything we say, everything we think is heaven. Rocky, you had something?
Yeah. So not oddly, but like I had it like an opposite reaction. I'm like, wow. So we're not going to be remembered in 100 years. Everything do, boom, puff of smoke, gone. But we know as Christians, that ain't the case. It kind of made me, it gave me a sense of comfort in knowing that, yes, our time here on this earth, the good, the bad, boom, gone, it's going to be done. But we're always alive in God. So yeah. I don't know.
Paul, you had something?
Yeah, it's just sort of like the someone politely slapping you in the face is a good example of Ecclesiastes. You know, wake up, wake up, wake up. It's okay. You know.
Julie?
maybe because a few minutes ago we were talking about mirrors and the verse about now we see through a mirror dimly. And for some reason, this notion of hevel reminded me of that. And like everything is hevel, all is hevel now, but we're seeing through the mirror dimly, but in time, we will see clearly that all will be revealed, and that in time, it's no longer hevel. So I think it might be somewhat encouraging.
Or at least, you know, the things we do, this life is hevel, but God is not. Sometimes even trying to follow God is hevel, but because it's human effort. But God is not hevel. So this book took them around 400 years to add to the Hebrew canon. Does that make sense to you? Do you see where some of the difficulties were on this? And unlike so many of the other books of the Hebrew Bible, it's not about the law. It's not about covenant. It's pure. On one level, it's philosophy. And people scratch their heads sometimes, though, why it even got into the Bible. And it's thought that a lot of that is sort of the tradition that it was written by Solomon, and that it's the wisdom of Solomon. Though there are other books that in that same tradition that are considered to be written by Solomon traditionally that did not get into the Hebrew canon. So it's kind of a mystery how this, and they debated it a long time. Whether it should be included or not, but just interesting that it got in. And I think there's a lot of value in what we read here, and I think it's almost like a nice sorbet between courses in the, you get some pretty heavy stuff. This is more thought provoking. It's not instructional. It's kind of pushing you to it. There's also, in terms of literary structure for this book, the thing is there's not a lot. And there's not much agreement among scholars about how it's structured. There is one kind of theory of the structure that has gained sort of the most popularity or the most credibility, and it's from Father Addison Wright. And you can see it's a very simple kind of layout that he's doing. It's title, it's initial poem, it's Kohelet's investigation of life, its conclusions, a concluding poem, and an epilogue. So for you, does this structure help you at all in trying to comprehend what's going on here? Because this is the best scholarship can do right now. And I think you're not alone, because Michael Fox, biblical scholar, said of this, that this proposed structure has no more effect on interpretation than a ghost in the attic. A literary or rhetorical structure should not merely be there. It must do something. It should guide readers in recognizing and remembering the author's train of thought. So I include it only because if you're challenged by this book, you're not alone. Biblical scholars are challenged by this book and figuring out where it is and where it goes and what it does. The Bible Project video mentioned voice in here, and there's a strong literary theory about this that it really comes down to three voices. The Bible Project, I think, mainly focused on two, but this is a theory from Kyle Greenwood, that the three voices are, he calls them QP, QS, and QFN. QP being the voice of Koheleth, the prophet, and this is written in first person, and it's kind of the voice of pure wisdom, right? And it speaks with authority, and it dispenses nuggets of wisdom and practical theology. Voice two is Koheleth as King Solomon, and so he's a little bit more practical minded, a little more cynical, a little more kind of removed from that pure philosophy, and he kind of acts a foil, Koheleth the prophet. And then there's QFN, the frame narrator, who kind of speaks proverbially in the third person, and is mainly at the beginning and the end, kind of putting everything in perspective. So it's the opening verses are this narrator, and the closing verses are this narrator, and the rest is this back and forth between the prophet and the king. And that's an interesting way to look at this. And Greenwood says that these voices are in dialogue with one another, each other throughout the book. And so that's an interesting, as you read that, you keep those voices in mind. I think it helps bring out some of the meaning and some of the vision that the author is looking for. And I just want to explore this a little bit further. And we'll start with a quote from Greenwood. It says, "I will argue here that there are three distinct voices in Ecclesiastes that serve three distinct functions. Although these voices are in dialogue with each other throughout the book, it is the primary goal of Qoheleth to persuade the readers that ultimate meaning in life lies not in its passing fancies, but in the imperative derived from conventional wisdom: fear God and keep God's commandment." And that's kind of the conclusion of the book when we get there, is looking at how those voices are kind of structured. This is a table from Greenwood's paper on this subject. So you see, and I'm not going to read all of this, but how generally in whether the first person, second person, third person, where their perspective is coming, what the overall theology is, some phrases that each of these voices use recurrently, and then kind of their overall discourse method. So for you, do you understand that the group understands the difference between what theism is and deism? Anybody?
Can you remind us what it is?
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear.
I don't remember.
So a theist believes in a creator God who's kind of constantly intervening in the world, and a deist believes in more of a hands-off God who kind of sometimes called it, a clockmaker God who sets things in motion and steps away. And you have to also consider that Solomon here is considered one of the wisest kings ever to live, but ultimately was kind of separated from God because of his wisdom. His wisdom kind of kept him away from God on one level, and his focus on finding meaning and finding life. So let's look a little bit at these different voices. So the first one is the prophet, and just a few verses from here. Can someone read this for us?
Sure.
You got it, Paul. Thank you.
When you go to the house of God, to draw near to listen is better than to sacrifice than in the sacrifice offered by fools, for they do not know how to keep from doing evil. Never be rash with your mouth, nor let your heart be quick to utter a word before God, for God is in heaven and you are upon earth. Therefore, let your words be few. For dreams come with many cares, and a fool's voice with many words. When you make a vow to God, do not delay fulfilling it, for he has no pleasure in fools. Fulfill what you vow. It is better that you should not vow than that you should vow and not fulfill it. Do not let your mouth lead you into sin, and do not say before the messenger that it was a mistake. Why should God be angry at your words and destroy the work of your hands? With many dreams come vanities and a multitude of words, but fear God.
Thank you. And so that last verse you could also look at as, with many dreams come hevel and a multitude of words, but fear God. Any reactions to this passage? No, we got Julie.
You almost get the impression. I'm sorry. You almost get the impression that the people of the scholars of Israel didn't know what to do with this book. They couldn't put it down. And that's why it eventually made its way into Torah.
It's true, Paul. I think that there's a lot to unpack here, but it takes work. You have to spend time with it. You have to spend prayer with it. It's not straightforward. Rocco?
So the word fear, the way we understand it and the way like Bible bangers use it, I think is probably different from the way the people who wrote this understood it. Isn't that right?
Yeah, I would think so. Fear is sometimes, you can translate it as awe or reverence or respect. It's not, oh, this guy's going to hit me over the head.
Right.
Not that kind of.
Right.
All right, well, let's move to the next voice. So this is the king, and you can see how kind of that's laid out from the thing. Will someone read this one for us?
I'll read it if
Don't make me
nobody
call
wants
him.
to.
Thank you, Rocco.
So I turn to consider wisdom and madness and folly. For what can the king's successor do? Only what has already been done. Then I saw that wisdom excels folly as light excels darkness. The wise have eyes in their head, but fools walk in darkness. Yet I perceive that the same fate befalls all of them. Then I said to myself, what happens to the fool will happen to me also. Why then have I been so very wise? And I said to myself that this also is vanity. For there is no enduring remembrance of the wise or of fools, seeing that in the days to come, all will have been long forgotten. How can the wise die just like fools? So I hated life because what is done under the sun was grievous to me, for all is vanity and a chasing after wind. I hated all my toil in which I had toiled under the sun, seeing that I must leave it to my successor, and who knows whether he will be wise or foolish. Yet he will be master of all for which I toiled and used my wisdom under the sun. This also is vanity.
Thank you, Rocco. And I want to apologize. I'm just noticing that circled bit at the top has an error in it. It says second person, should be first person. I apologize. The chart on the left is correct. So you see here the king is kind of more jaded, I think is kind of the way to say it. He's quietly looking at things. And I love that those last verses. I hated all my toil in which I had toiled under the sun, seeing that I must leave it to my successor. And who knows whether he's wise or foolish. When you're done, you don't know who's going to take up your work and keep going. And they could be dummies. And yet he will be master of all for which I toiled and used my wisdom under the sun. This also is Havel. Other reactions to this?
It's a fascinating trip through frustration, for one another term.
Yeah, and you see how effective the author is in kind of playing these voices off one another. Because if they just sat down and wrote it all out, I think it would be less challenging. It would prompt less thought.
Seems like a verbal puppet show.
Yeah. Well, and a dialogue, and then you have the next one that's going to be just sort of the narrator who kind of steps aside and who speaks both for and on behalf of Solomon. So this is the frame narrator, and who speaks about the teacher, and is always speaking about the other folks. And will someone read this for us?
I'll do it.
All right, thank you.
Hevel of Hevel, says the teacher, Hevel of Hevel. All is Hevel. What do people gain from all the toil at which they toil under the sun? A generation goes and a generation comes, but the earth remains forever. The sun rises and the sun goes down and hurries to the place where it rises. The wind blows to the south and goes around to the north. Round and around goes the wind. And when it circuits, the winds return. All streams run to the sea, but the sea is not full. To the place where the streams flow, where they continue to flow. All things are wearisome, more than one can express. The eye is not satisfied with seeing, or the ear filled with hearing. What has been is what will be, and what has been done is what will be done. There is nothing new under the sun. Is there a thing of which it is said, see, this is new? It has already been in the ages before us. The people of long ago are not remembered, nor will there be any remembrance of people yet to come. By those whom remembrance of people yet to come, by those who come after them.
Thank you, Bob. And so we see in this passage, we see a few different phrases that I'm sure you knew, but maybe you didn't know came from Ecclesiastes. All streams run to the sea, but the sea is not full. It's a big one. Or but the big one here is there is nothing new under the sun. It's really putting our short time on the earth kind of into perspective, and that's kind of the role of this narrator as well, to put all of this into kind of a human perspective after these folks are going back and forth. And I'm just keeping an eye on my time. I got like 8.5 minutes left. So let's quickly, I wanted to try this little experiment where you guys read a passage and tell me who the voice is. Is this helpful? And I'll read this for interest of time. Besides being wise, the teacher also taught the people knowledge, weighing and studying and arranging many proverbs. The teacher sought to find pleasing words, and he wrote words of truth plainly. The sayings of the wise are like goads, and like nails firmly fixed are the collected sayings that are given by one shepherd. So which voice is that?
He's a narrator.
Yeah, that's right. That's the QFN, frame narrator. I'm just going to run through these quickly, just so you get it. So, and I won't read all of this because I'm running a little bit out of time. Surely oppression makes the wise foolish, and a bribe corrupts the heart. Better is the end of a thing than its beginning. The patient in spirit are better than the proud in spirit. Do not be quick to anger, for anger lodges in the bosom of fools. Do not say, why were the former days better than these? For it is not from wisdom that you ask this. How many people say that now, right? So who's our speaker here? What voice?
I would guess QS.
Q.
But I could be
QS?
wrong. But it won't matter according to Ecclesiastes.
Right, it's Hevel. Yeah, in this case, it's the prophet. Which I suppose makes the next one obvious, but but you can see, so that part of the difference here between the prophet and the narrative. Prophet does tend to speak more in verse, although there is a paragraph here of prose. But you see, this is what I have seen to be good. That first person thing. It is fitting to eat and drink and find enjoyment in all the toil with which one toils under the sun, the few days of the life God gives us, for this is our lot. So it's not that you shouldn't enjoy life while you're here. Just don't attach more meaning to it than there is. Enjoy the life that God has given you, but on some level, that life is also a little bit of a burden because it is itself a distraction from what we're called to do, which is to love God and serve God. So going through here, yeah. So pessimistic. So some other interpretations and challenges here. One of the things that is stressed in this book are the limits of wisdom. You know, and just a couple of verses for example, the wise man like the fool will not be long remembered. In days to come, both will be forgotten. And I want you to remember as we read these that this is supposedly by or about Solomon the wise, whose reputation was for wisdom. So on one level, we're kind of knocking down Solomon here, that his wisdom in the end is itself hevel, right? This is another verse you'll know but didn't know came from Ecclesiastes. The race is not to the swift or the battle to the strong, nor does food come to the wise, or wealth to the brilliant, or favor to the learned, but time and chance happen to them all. Like the fool, the wise man too must die. Other interpretations and challenges, that life is enigmatic and it's out of our control. And that's really the central. It is out of our control. And so human action is hevel. And yes, enjoy the things of 5 minutes. Thank you. Enjoy the things of this life, but never think that they are significant before God. It focuses as well on the unknowable nature of God, and doesn't really talk about this other stuff in the Old Testament or the Hebrew Bible, that covenant with God, or action God. The human-centric book, our actions are looked at. At the same time, it say that what we're doing is futile, that we should never give up questing, searching. Even that is Havel. And the final word on the matter here, that the frame narrator says at the very end of the book, the end of the matter, all has been heard. Fear God and keep commandments, for that is the whole duty of everyone. So just a couple of minutes left here. If there's any of my references while we talk, is there anything, other impressions you have? And Julie will cut us off when we're done.
So I always knew that turn, turn, turn came from Ecclesiastes. The bird song quotes it as well. Now, with this presentation, I really see where that fits. So thanks, Steve.
Julie, yes.
Yeah, it's I knew nothing about Ecclesiastes except those references. So thank you. And
Thank you, yeah.
and under the heading of there's nothing new under the sun, in terms of literature in the early part of the 1900s, with in literature, you know, James Joyce and a bunch of those kinds of guys were doing exactly what the author of Ecclesiastes is doing, with different voices talking to each other, and everybody saying, "Oh, this is new. This is exciting. This is wonderful." And then
Hevel.
yeah.
Yeah, it's and so I think there was a very good chance this book was not going to get into the Bible one way or another, and I think it really would have been a loss to thoughtful following of God if it were not in here. Anything else?
Well,
Steve,
Steve, I would like to thank you. Go ahead, Rocco.
I just wanted to say, I'm actually motivated to read it now. You made it interesting. I never read it before. So thank you. I'm sorry to interrupt you, Kevin.
Oh, no problem, my brother. So, Steve, I just wanted to thank you for cheering up my day, because now I realize that everything is hevel and then you die.
You're not
But
wrong.
I'm so happy. No, but I'm so happy that Rocco had provided his enlightenment in that, you know, that's kind of an earthly look, because we have the promise of heaven, and heaven is definitely not heaven.
It's true. That's true. All right. If nobody else wants to jump in,
So
I
can we
have.
say life's a hevel and then you die? Something like that.
See that, Julie? I'm giving you back a whole minute.
Hey, that excellent. And
Thank you all. Oh, let me stop sharing.